What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Dr. Phil Sarpon. Today we are talking with Dr. Sideroff. He brings over 40 years of research, clinical, and high-end consulting from elite athletes to C-suite executives, all centered around the vital idea of how do you actually survive stress. But not just survive stress, how do you thrive through stress? How can you harness the energy of stress? In his breakthrough book, The 9 Pillars of Resilience, he describes a model in which he helps people not just merely bounce back from stress, but really thrive through adversity. He helps people from top universities and institutions, major corporations, global sport bodies. He has a wealth of knowledge and education and research. And he uses all of that to give you practical steps. Whether you are trying to become a psychologist, a therapist, a practitioner, or a clinician, or even a high performer, or even if you are trying to help your patients and your clients deal with stress, I think this is a really needed discussion about how to navigate trauma, career transitions, and really face adversity from a roadmap perspective in thinking how you can get through stress and how you can also optimize your performance and transformation. And you can also support our efforts by becoming a member. But without further ado, we will just jump right into this interview. All right, Dr. Sideroff, it is so good to see you. Thank you for being here. How's it going?
It's going great, Phil, and thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
I am as well. I think you have a fascinating background. If you mind, can you tell us a little bit about your education journey, what got you interested in pursuing a doctorate, and maybe what you got your doctorate in and what your specialty is?
Of course. So I started, it's interesting, my very first psychology course that I took, I was very fortunate to be in a very small liberal arts college, SUNY Binghamton, State University of New York at Binghamton, but at the time, it was very, very small. My first psychology class, I was very surprised. We walked in and it was a laboratory, and they gave me my little cage with a rat in it. This is introductory psychology, right? And so there was a laboratory attached to the lectures in the course, and we got to train that rat to do all kinds of things: press a bar for food, press a bar to avoid shock, turn around to turn a light on, and et cetera, et cetera. But at the very end of the course, and this was what was really grabbed me, at the end of the course, we had a book, Keller and Schoenfeld, and at the end, the last chapter, it related all of the conditioning that we were doing, operant conditioning we were doing, to how that plays out in the real world. And it made a lot of sense to me, and that was the start of my career. And I was really always interested in how learning and memory took place in the brain. And so I started out, my career was in brain research. I was very fortunate to take a postdoctoral fellowship at UC Irvine with Jim McGaw, who's done a lot of work in memory. But there were a lot of really young, amazing, sharp psychologists, and it was the Department of Psychobiology. And I could walk down and go into the laboratory of Richard Thompson and look at how they were placing electrodes in the brain and recording brain units and seeing what happens in the brain. It was fascinating to me, and I really got into it. I took a position at McGill University as an assistant professor, McGill University in Montreal at the time in the 70s, whereas UC Irvine were all the young Turks of neuroscience. McGill were the pioneers. And it's like a kid in a candy shop. I'd go down the hall and I would have a conversation with Ron Melzack, who was the person who established the theory of the gate pain theory. And so most of the work in the area of pain for the next half century was based on his theory of how pain was gated. Down the next hall was Peter Milner. So Olds and Milner were the ones who discovered the reward center of the brain. And then I would be able to go to a lecture by Wilder Penfield. Wilder Penfield was a neurosurgeon, and he was the first to, during neurosurgery, to literally stimulate the cortex and have the patient, because there's no pain receptors in the brain, they were awake, and they could tell him what they experienced when he stimulated different areas of the brain. And he was the first to begin mapping the brain, what it does. But the person who became one of my early mentors was Donald Hebb. And he wrote the first book, neuroscience book, The Organization of Behavior, and literally formulated what takes place in the brain during learning and memory. And we still, many of us in the field still say what he first said: neurons that fire together, wire together. So that was my journey, where I was so fascinated and interesting in how the brain works, brain and behavior. But I wanted, it's a problem when you're working with animals, because you can't ask them what they're feeling, and you can't ask them what's going on with them. And I wanted to be able to communicate with the people I was working with. And so I got into clinical, started out with a postdoctoral fellowship, took me back to UCLA, where I was studying conditioned aspects of addiction. And here's where I learned something that continues to be one of the most important lessons of my career. And that was that when you're working with addicts, when you're working with addicts who are now sober, who've gone clean and they're now sober, the one thing that's most dangerous to them, and it's all around, is stress. And one of my clients said, being an addict is like you're driving down the road in a station wagon. That's like the old time SUV. And, you get a bill and you throw it in the back seat. You get a summons, you throw it in the back seat. You get all these negative messages, you throw them in the back seat. And when you get sober, it's like you slam on the brake and everything from the back seat falls into your lap. And so we have this kind of, in addiction, there's on the one hand, when you are trying to stay sober, the one thing that triggers craving more than anything else, stress. And I was looking at this during that period, and so it let me know and realize that if I wanted to help these people I was working with, I had to figure out how to help them with stress. But then when I moved into other areas and treating other types of clients, the same rule applied. They could be doing okay, but as soon as the stress is built up, their coping abilities start to fall by the wayside. They become more anxious, and they start to have more and more physical and emotional and mental problems. And so that really put me on a path of wanting to help people deal with stress and figuring out what the real issues are around stress.
Wow. Such an extensive education and experience. A lot of the people that you named are people that I've read in my textbooks in graduate school, right? And it is incredible to hear that you had these interactions with people, the classes or seminars and workshops. And to your point about stress, it's interesting for me. I'm in a PTSD clinic, but I'm also in a substance use clinic for addiction of substance use disorders. And so when you talk about this concept of stress and that being sort of this initiatory factor that really contributes to a lot of addiction, I'm curious for you, like, what have you seen in terms of the resiliency from stress? Like, how do you then help people either deal with stress, current stress, but also future stress, right? Because if you can deal with the stress, that I'm assuming, then you can minimize the risk of relapse. And so what have you seen in that research?
Well, so when I realized this and I started to develop programs of stress mastery and stress management, I started to do executive workshops, executive trainings. And I'd come and do a program for 20, 25, 30 executives. And when I was finished, they would all come up to me and they would say, Dr. Sideroff, this is eye-opening. This is really amazing how you laid it all out for me and showed me the importance here. And I loved some of the techniques that you gave us. I'm going to go out and use them. But the interesting thing is, a few months later, invariably, I would connect with some of the people that had been in my programs. Not a single one of them had followed through. Now, this is an issue in all of learning, but it's a particular issue with dealing with stress. And so that led me down this path of researching why people have resistance to dealing with stress. And that's where I started to identify the points of resistance. I published a paper just a couple of months ago in Psychology Today called The Four Horsemen of Stress. And I identify the structural factors that actually interfere with us really making progress in dealing with stress, not the least of which, if you think about all the successes in your life, I guarantee that all or most are associated with stress. So back to Donald Hebb, my mentor, neurons that fire together, wire together. We in our brains, we've wired success with stress. This is only one of the reasons why not only don't we manage stress properly, but we're all actually biased towards seeking out stress in our lives. And so I developed a model of resilience. It's in my new book, The 9 Pillars of Resilience, the proven path to master stress, slow aging, and increase vitality. Because there is a way to find what I refer to as your stress sweet spot. And that's the level of stress that's optimal. It's the level of stress in which you're maximizing both your health and performance, even though most of us push way past that sweet spot into the danger zone. And so this has been a lot of my work, is to help people through using this 9 pillars of resilience. And the other thing I did to really support the process, and this is most important, when people are dealing with stress, they usually are overwhelmed. And it's like, okay, where do I begin? And I got to start thinking differently. I have to deal with my anxiety. I have to, do more exercise. I have to practice relaxing. And they quickly get overwhelmed because they both experience all that needs to be done and that the goal is so far down the road. And so I developed this concept of the path. And the path is alongside of us every moment of every day. And so the goal is not really in this moment somehow to reach all the ways down the road. It's just to take a few steps based on the lessons of my book and of my model, on the 9 pillars to get onto the path. The path is defined by my 9 pillars. So each pillar is a different aspect of resilience. And if you take any steps based on improving along any of these 9 pillars, it puts you on the path. And once you're on the path, you could feel successful and you could feel a sigh of relief because you've reached the goal for today, or at least for this moment today. And it's a time to appreciate and celebrate that you took those steps to put you on the path. And that becomes the process for becoming more resilient. Is that what can I do right here and right now that puts me on the path? And no matter where you're at, no matter what's going on in your life, there's always a best way. And there's always some steps you can take to put you onto the path.
One of the things that kind of comes to mind is I know there's a lot of research that shows, even in the realm of sports psychology, right, for athletes, you talked about the optimal level of stress, right, where even for athletes, there's this aspect where they want to be alert. They are leaning into the stress, but if they are too stressed, right, then their performance is going to go down. I'm curious, because it just seems like sort of this teetering balance between what is the most optimal, and then even from the concept of the path, being really present, focused, and I'm assuming very introspective and in tune with someone's own variation of the stress that's happening within themselves. Can you speak to that balance of optimizing stress in that way?
Well, I think there are very few, if any, people that have to worry about underactivation of their nervous system. Because there's so much going on in our life and our day that are activating our nervous system, our stress response, the sympathetic or stress branch of the nervous system that has 2 branches, one to activate and one to recover, which need to be in balance. And so we want to think about this notion of balance. We thrust out into the world, then we want to do something that helps us recover, because every time we thrust out, if you think about the fight or flight response, we're tightening muscles, we're speeding up heart rate, blood pressure, and so we use up the resources of our body. The body doesn't have unlimited resources, and so we must balance that out by taking time to go into the parasympathetic recovery branch of the nervous system. And there's no shortcut, no ways around that. We have to find that place of balance. Now, if I asked you or people in the audience right now to check in with your bodies, you might notice some tension in your chest and your shoulders and your jaw. That's part of the engagement of the stress response. And because we turn it on so frequently throughout our day, our lives, we adapt to higher and higher levels of stress and tension. But because we adapt to it, it feels like, oh, this is normal. Well, everyone's normal is not the healthy normal, right? It's maybe normal for us because we've continued to activate. But we have to find that place of true balance in which our bodies, when we come to rest, our bodies truly feel calm. And so everybody's different in terms of what's their optimal. Everybody has to find what their optimal is, but most of the time we fool ourselves. Most of the time we notice the activation and we might say, oh, this is getting me going. This is making me function better. And in short bursts, that might be true, it might be okay. But life is a marathon, it's not a sprint.
We know that breath is important. Can you speak to the levels of exposing oneself to stress? Because I think sometimes that's sort of like this paradoxical moment. I think sometimes we look at stress as, I want to avoid this. I don't want to feel uncomfortable. I don't want to feel stressed, and so I avoid. But can you speak to that paradoxical nature of actually leaning into the stress to overcome that potential aspect of stress?
Well, you bring up a few different things. First of all, I totally agree with you that one way we have access to balance, we have access to parasympathetic recovery, is through our breath. When we breathe in, we trigger the sympathetic branch of our nervous system. When we breathe out, we trigger the parasympathetic branch. So when we breathe in, heart rate speeds up. When we breathe out, heart rate slows down. And this is a clue to an optimal recovery process in which we spend longer on the exhale, that's activating the parasympathetic, than on the inhale. And then we also know that if we breathe at approximately 6 breaths per minute, we engage certain mechanisms in our physiology that go into alignment and optimize our physiology. And that happens at approximately 6 breaths per minute. Some people, it's 5 breaths per minute. And so this gives us a hint as to what we can do to recover from overstimulation, overactivation, and we can practice and train so we keep getting better and better at this. My 5th pillar of resilience is mental balance and mastery, what some people refer to as mindset. And if we look at us at a stress we're about to engage in as a problem, as, oh, I wish I didn't have to do this, but we have to do it, our body responds in one way. If, on the other hand, we embrace the challenge, this is a challenge. I know that when I face challenges, I learn and I grow. And then we approach the stress from that perspective, totally different result. Hans Selye, the pioneer of stress research, he's the one that took the term stress from physics and brought it into human behavior. And he distinguished distress from eustress. And eustress are positive stresses. Now, you can't just keep piling up positive stresses because they still utilize resources of your body, but they have a less of an effect than distress, and they don't cause some of the aspects of your physiological changes that distress does, certain terms of hormonal changes. So how you approach from a cognitive perspective, from a mindset perspective, the stresses in your life determines how much of a negative impact they have on you.
I'm also wondering, one of the things that makes me think about, so in one of my rotations, I did a sort of a course and a series of biofeedback. And it was incredible because I think, as a therapist or a psychologist, usually I'm very used to just it being me and the client or the patient. And biofeedback is fascinating because you bring in this technology that, in a sense, becomes a third entity in the room. What are maybe some of your thoughts about biofeedback and how that could be such an amazing tool for patients or clients who are looking to practice this work?
Phil, I'm glad you brought that up because biofeedback is a very powerful tool. And I would encourage anybody getting into the field of psychology to learn about biofeedback and make it one of the tools in your tool chest. So I've done a lot of work and clinical work as well as research in biofeedback and neurofeedback for the last 30, 40 years. I helped introduce it to China, and actually was the first director of biofeedback continuing education for the country of China. But I've also published the first controlled study using neurofeedback in addiction with tremendous success. And in a more recent study, I used neurofeedback as an intervention with breast cancer survivors who had what's referred to as chemobrain. Chemobrain cognitive deficits due to the cancer and chemotherapy. And we got miraculous results. We demonstrated tremendous healing of the brain using neurofeedback. So back to your original question, yes, it all starts in the body. If you don't have mastery over your nervous system, then external forces are going to be in control of you because they're going to hijack your body's response. And when your body gets triggered because of some kind of stress, because of conditioned stimuli associated with a trauma, and your body goes out of balance, you actually lose access to your cortex. Your brain wants to shift down to the lower centers of survival and emotions, limbic and the brain stem. Okay. So biofeedback is a great tool, whether you want to practice and train recovery from stress, how to deeply relax, but overall, how to have control over your nervous system, true control, being able to either keep it in balance or restore balance after a stressful experience. The other thing about biofeedback, which is amazing for clinicians, a lot of clients come to us and they have this story in their head about how incapable they are of change, and then they see what goes on in their day and their lives based on that story in their head. So they can have a success, but they find a way to negate it. They say, "Oh well, I was just lucky," or "It was coincidence." They'll find a way to explain it away, but they will also focus on from their story and from their history about what's wrong. Now, with biofeedback, one of the beautiful things about biofeedback is you get objective evidence of your success. If you lower muscle tension on the monitor, you will see your muscle tension go down. It's real, it's happening, it's objective. And so it's a very useful tool to help people develop a more functional and positive story about themselves. Oh, I am capable of making this change. They can't deny it as easily. So biofeedback has a lot of benefits, and I really encourage people to find a way to get some training in it and use it in your practice. In fact, on Wednesday, I'm going to UCLA to do a train the trainer with a group of clinical therapists in the medical school to both give them tools for themselves to help them avoid burnout, as well as tools they can use with their clients.
What would you say is the differences between neurofeedback and biofeedback? I think that's something that I've kind of been confused about.
So neurofeedback is a subset of biofeedback. Biofeedback uses some physiological modality and feeds information back to you about how that physiological response is happening. Neurofeedback, sometimes referred to as neurotherapy or EEG biofeedback, is monitoring your brain waves over certain areas of the brain. The computer digests and correlates the EEG data and feeds it back to you, typically showing you when you increase or decrease certain frequency ranges, frequency bands. So a very frequent one, a lot of people with trauma, a lot of people with pain, a lot of people with depression, and a lot of people with a lot of stress show elevated amplitudes at low frequencies, say theta, that's between 4 and 8 cycles per second. In the frequency ranges for focus and concentration between, say, 12 and 18 cycles per second, it's low. But then when you go into high beta in the 25 to 30 cycles per second frequency, it's elevated again. So you have too much low and you too much high. What does that give you? It gives you attentional issues like attention deficit disorder, too much low frequency, your brain isn't working well enough. But also the high frequencies create stress, tension, and anxiety. And so a typical protocol for neurofeedback training would be to have 3 bars. And the amplitude of those 3 bands I just mentioned would be moving in real time based on what your brain is doing. And when the low frequencies drop below a certain level, certain threshold, that bar would turn green, but it would be red above that. The ones you're trying to enhance will turn green above the threshold, and then the high frequencies will turn green when they drop below the threshold. So 3 bars going, and when all 3 turn green, you might get a tone as well. And the brain, you're giving the assignment to your brain, and your brain is figuring out how to get into the optimal state. And that's neurofeedback training.
Where do you see the field going as it relates to utilizing more technology to help us as it relates to dealing with stress?
Well, if we think of 2 primary factors, awareness and measurement, right? Biofeedback. So the use of wearables becomes very important. So I have one of these little Aura rings that's monitoring my physiology. But what it does is it helps me remember to pay attention. It helps me want to, like I monitor my sleep. And when I monitor my sleep so that I'm looking at what my sleep quality is in the next morning, it guides me to doing a better job. The notion that I'm going to look at this tomorrow morning supports me getting to bed at the time that I know I'm going to get the best results tomorrow. So I need to go to sleep between 11 and 11:45 to get the best readings of my sleep patterns. If I go to bed after 12, the quality of my sleep falls off. So that stimulates me to remember to go to sleep at the right time, because I want to look at that the next morning and see that I got the best night's sleep. So it becomes very useful to measure and to be more aware and pay attention to those things that improve the quality of our life.
What is the most important thing that we haven't talked about that you want people to know, either about your research or about the work that you're doing?
The first thing I would say is that people will benefit from learning about my model of resilience, because it's a comprehensive model, the 9 pillars that I've researched over many years, that addresses everything that goes into optimal functioning. So it's not just, my definition of resilience is a very comprehensive definition that really translates into optimal functioning. And so it makes a difference because it makes a difference physiologically. It makes a difference in terms of how fast or slow we age. It makes a difference in terms of how well we think and problem solve, etc. But the one thing I will mention, which we haven't talked about, is the first pillar. The first 3 pillars have to do with relationship. And the first pillar is your relationship with yourself. And it's sort of like the first of many concentric circles with us in the center. And right in the center of that is how we treat ourselves. And most of us are too hard on ourselves, too critical, too negative, too judgmental. Most of us are ready to go to blame with ourselves instead of support. And so the first pillar is one in which I encourage people to begin paying attention to how they talk to themselves. That's your relationship with yourself. And to notice all the negatives, to notice how you put yourself down, to notice how you say things to yourself that actually hold you back in life. And all my other 8 pillars follow from that, but the goal with the first pillar is to establish a healthy relationship with yourself. And to have a healthy relationship with yourself, you want to install a healthy internal voice or a healthy internal parent. Remember, the way we talk to ourselves, we didn't learn how to do that right. We didn't go to school to learn the best ways of talking to ourselves, of treating ourselves, thinking about ourselves. We got it through the process of osmosis, modeling. We have a parent that handles situations by getting anxious. We think that's the way to be. We don't even think that's the way. We just model it. Violence, whatever you want to say, we either do it the way they did it or we overreact and do the opposite. But in any event, the point is, we're not deciding anew the best way to be with ourselves. And that's what we have to do. And so the healthy internal parent that you want to install comes from a place of love, compassion, acceptance, support, self-care, and joy. And there needs to be joy in there. But when you start identifying that model, then now you have a comparison. How am I treating myself? Am I treating myself that way, or is it a different way? And so I would say that would be the one thing we haven't touched on that I believe is of primary importance, both in resilience and success in life, in success in your career, and the first step in making sure you don't burn out. My third pillar is relationship with something greater, which could be spirituality or meaning and purpose in your life. But in your relationship with others, there's a couple of things that we need to keep in mind. Number one, just like we didn't determine our inner voice, early in our lives, we didn't determine, to a great extent, who we associate with. And in fact, some of our early lessons guide us into relationships with people that have some similarities to what we were familiar with at home. And so we may be in relationships with people who are critical and judgmental, and we may think this is okay and normal. However, in life, well, let me put it this way. When you're in a relationship with someone who's critical or judgmental, how do you imagine you will be in that relationship? Will you be relaxed and allow yourself to be vulnerable, or will you be on guard? Okay, so you want to start being the master of your relationships, being the person who determines the qualities of your relationships. Because when you're in a relationship, you can either be in a place of needing to protect your heart or being open so that you can receive emotional nourishment. If you're protecting your heart, it's hard to receive emotional nourishment. And this is true in general. When we go out into the world, we're either going out and making sure we're protecting the heart, so we're on guard, or we're more trusting of our ability to discriminate and choose healthy relationships, so that if I know this is a healthy relationship, I could let down my guard. If I know that's not a healthy relationship, I'll have my guard up, which is appropriate. But what I'm able to do, which is my eighth pillar of resilience, is be flexible. And here it's to know when I need to flex into defending and where I flex into being vulnerable and receiving emotional nourishment.
For someone who is perhaps in college and they're looking at your research work, they're looking at what you've done, maybe they want to follow in your footsteps. What are some of the things that you would advise them in terms of maybe potentially graduate school or clinical endeavors as it relates to their future?
Well, I guess the first thing I would recommend is you don't have to make a final decision of what direction you want your career to go in. Give yourself the opportunity to explore. A lot of times, for example, we have to make a choice when we go into graduate school. I was in physiological psychology, but I made sure when I was in graduate school to go into some of the clinical courses also, because I wanted to get a broader range of experiences before I had to commit. And so you want to do that. You want to get as broad a range of experience before you have to commit. One of the things that my book helps people with is be more resilient and thus be more resistant to burnout. Burnouts there are a lot of people who burn out because they take on too much or because they're too hard on themselves. So you want to make sure that whatever it is you choose, that you're finding a right way of taking care of yourself.
How do you take care of yourself, Dr. Sideroff, in terms of giving back to yourself and filling your cup?
The way I give back to myself is I play. I like to play. So I play racquetball, I rollerblade, I mountain bike, I hike. So I take time to do all of those things. I don't like to go into a gym and work out, even though I do that. But I find the things that I enjoy that pull me rather than me having to push myself. So that's the one thing. You want to find things that pull you, not that, oh, do I have to do that today? So that's one thing. And then you want to make sure you have good relationships. You want to have relationships with people who you love being with. And so you take time that pulls you in that direction as well. And you want to make sure you're enjoying the work that you're doing. And you want to remind yourself that you're enjoying that it's work you enjoy, because we can get bogged down in the details. We can get bogged down in what we have to do, what we should do, what we think others want us to do. Make whatever you do, make it your own and do it your way, and appreciate that. And then when you're doing it, recognize you're doing it your way. No one's making you do it. It's your choice. Well, thanks, Phil. I enjoyed this interview. People listening, you can get my first chapter free if you want. I think I gave you the link to that. And if you go to my website, drstephensideroff.com, I have a resilience challenge for you. That's a questionnaire you can take and self-score, and you can come up with your own resilience profile showing you which areas are your strengths and which areas you need more work.
I love that. Thank you, Dr. Sideroff.